Yeah, so just to add to that, he was arrested, he was detained, and when they arrested him and took him in, he was fine. I mean, there's footage of it being a little bit more rough than it should have been, but somewhere between his arrest and being held at the station, he suffered a spinal injury that nobody can explain what happened. The coroner determined that he died from that spinal injury, but nobody knows how it happened. And so, and Wagner was in the hospital for a week. He died a week later. A week after being arrested for bipolar, and being arrested and being in the hospital. And so, something happened. Somebody must have known. This whole wall of silence thing that authorities tend to do to protect themselves is something that's not acceptable anymore. And that's, I mean, I don't condone violence. I don't condone looting or rioting, but that's not how the protest in Baltimore started. The protest in Baltimore started, one, mourning his death because it started on the day of his funeral, and so many thousands of people came there that a small group of them went crazy. And I will tell you, it was my belief that it wasn't even the people that came to Baltimore to mourn, but young people who were just already pissed, already know what's been going on, that took it to the extreme. In fact, the people who came there to mourn are now trying to work with the police. Come. Move in the corner. Right, exactly. Tell them. Thank you. Yeah, I like you. You're the boss. Oh, sorry. What you meant to say in the speech?
I'm so sorry to hear so.
No, you're good, man. You're good. Yeah. Thanks.
You're used to people carrying you, aren't you?
No. It's okay, man. Yeah.
I think you just took a picture of it. It flashed. Anyway, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Even if you're scared of us, it's okay. But the reason why it's making national news and actually worldwide news right now is because this is a city literally right next door to the capital of our country. This is happening within 50 miles of the White House. And so you have a black president in the White House, and you have black citizens of a community so close to the seat of power in the U.S., so disempowered, so frustrated that this is how they're expressing themselves. And it really makes us criticize what we consider to be American democracy. That's on the high level. On the low level, the fact is it's young people who are being affected by this. It's young men, particularly of color. And now, all of the young people who are going out to protest for justice for Freddie Gray are now targets. A lot of them are being arrested, but beyond that, they're being demonized in the media. I mean, it's like, I saw one headline, "Don't piss off the black kids." That was one of the headlines. But of course, this was from a right-wing conservative blog. And then, of course, you have the other side there saying, look, these kids may not be expressing themselves in the right way, but they are entitled to express their frustration. I'm going to throw it out to you. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. I would ask only that what you say be respectful. Try your best to keep the, profanity or anything down just a little bit. But can you tell me your name?
It's not going to bring him life back. So what they're doing with cars and everything, it's not necessary. I understand that it's a protest, but bottom line, his life is not going to be returned by doing all of this. It's just like the Trayvon Martin situation. Walking out of school, I remember that because Miramar went on strike, Miramar left. The entire campus left. It didn't bring back Trayvon. It's not going to bring their life back. So it's not necessary to be bombing cars and doing what they're doing in Baltimore. It's not necessary. You want to protest? Do it decently.
I've been in a conflict the last 2 years because I've always advocated peaceful protest. I model my background with Gandhi and King, and as much as, and I never struck down, I never was quick to strike down Malcolm X's theory, because at the end of the day, how this government works is through force, and the only way that they will even open their eyes or pay attention is through the same force. Not in the same way, not delegated the same way, not not maniacal and thoughtless. There has to be some method to it. Because I did some research very recently, especially yesterday. I did research and there's a few articles that I read, and it wasn't until in Birmingham, Alabama, that they said, okay, we're going to start taking out cops, that the administration at the time said, okay, we have to put, and it was even said in 1963, President Kennedy, before he passed away, that the next move would be, if this really starts to stir up, that we have to pass it was very vague the way he said it, but it was the Civil Rights Act. He didn't exactly say that because it didn't become that until Johnson's term. In India, Gandhi, and even though we model, preach that is portrayed so much that that's what needs to be done, that's what's being portrayed, but what isn't seen and what isn't researched and what isn't learned. One thing I definitely learned yesterday, and I've been kind of noticing patterns of, is that until some acts of force towards the movement, towards what needs to be done isn't done, then nothing is really going to be achieved. Because it wasn't until about 5 years after Gandhi's campaign that there was, I forgot exactly what group, but it's very fresh to me, so I don't know exactly. But the concept being that you start with a peaceful movement, and then there's acts that have to.
You got final?
Yeah.
Good luck. That's all right, Samantha. Thank you for your contribution. All right.
There's things that have to be acted upon, and as much as, and I said, it goes partly against what I feel, because I feel that we don't have to, but we're not in that world right now.
I'm gonna let you guys get started with the sandwiches. I know some people, we're gonna continue. We're not done, but I know some people have to leave, and so, if and when you have to leave, that's okay. I just want to introduce yourself to the group.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm Alex.
All right, this is Alex. What Alex was talking about was the fact that there were already protests towards demanding desegregation, equal access to public spaces and stuff like that. But it wasn't until there was a literal threat to the authorities that there seemed to be movement towards a civil rights act. And he said John F. Kennedy passed away. John F. Kennedy didn't pass away. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was assassinated because he wanted to move in the direction of civil rights. So it's really important to understand, we use softer words, but he was killed because he was in support of civil rights. So you understand historically, when we talk about justice for race, for gender, for people who are differently abled, who have disabilities, for people who are different oriented sexually and that sort of thing, there are going to be violent people who resist. And so what is being debated now is how should we respond? Those of us who believe in justice, should we respond with peaceful, like Gandhi recommended, or is there some balance of peaceful protest with violence that's appropriate?
I think that's actually the paradox of the question, because like you touched on the idea that we have to use force to get an idea across, to really hammer it in, and I feel like that's the paradox. We're saying that this is not good what they're doing, destroying cars and burning down houses. I'm not sure on the details, and of course, yes, that's wrong. But how can you condone that being inappropriate, but then condoning officers or people that we trust the law with to beat a man, to senselessly into the ground? I think it's just something very difficult to really keep your head around.
Exactly. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm John.
All right.
What I was gonna say is, I think. Well, I got a question. Or this, to my understanding, there is no how do I put this, central leader to the protest.
That's a very good point. And the reality of the situation is, whenever these types of protests happen, particularly when it's response or reactionary to violence that has occurred or some sort of injustice, there hardly ever is a leader.
Yeah, so that's how I figured. That's how I see there's one problem. There's no central, like you said, y'all bring up Martin Luther King and Gandhi because there were protests, but they were a central leader. That's why they got stuff across.
But that also only developed over time.
And that developed over time. And this has been going on for a while, and I still, to my understanding, don't know any central leaders in any of these protests.
And just so you know, like with Gandhi, for instance. Gandhi was, many people don't know that Gandhi was a lawyer. Actually, and Gandhi was actually raised in Africa. And he saw what true segregation was in South Africa, and it sensitized him to the fact that even though his people in India were the majority, that they were being segregated, they were being suppressed. And so when he went back to India, he came back as a leader. The average person in India right now is still not a high earner, so you come back with a law degree, they're going to recognize you as a leader. Likewise with Dr. King, he was a reverend. He has a PhD in theology. He went to one of the schools that I went to. He went to Boston University. So he was recognized as a leader in the church, as an intellectual, etc. So it's relatively easy for people to what's called coalesce around him. When you have situations like this that are going on right now, you not only have a whole bunch of people who don't care to look for a leader, because that means discipline, right? But also there are a lot of people who are jockeying for the position of leader. No, this is the right way. No, this is the right way. No, this is the best way. No, that is. So in the modern context, it's a lot harder to find a leader to coalesce around. And so oftentimes these demonstrations don't end up being as effective as the boycotts in Montgomery, the freedom walks, the bus boycotts, and so on and so forth, or Gandhi's protests, peaceful protests, sit-ins and stuff like that. It's hard to get those types of things done now because there is competition for leadership, one, and also the cameras are always going to be where the violence is.
Oh, yeah.
10,000 peaceful marches that took place in themselves said that those who make a peaceful revolution possible will make violent revolution.
Right.
So it's bound to happen one way or another.
Y'all got the translation of that? Yeah. Those who make peaceful demonstration impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Meaning if people don't feel that they have some recourse or access to justice, it's only a matter of time before it explodes. And that's pretty much what you're seeing in Baltimore right now. And as I said, I'm not condoning. Keep pushing people down long enough. This is what results. And it's not just Baltimore 2015. This is for thousands of years of human history.
I think, I don't, like, first let me start by saying I don't think all cops are bad or dirty or racist or whatever, but in cities like we saw in Ferguson, we saw in cities where institutionalized racism is still sort of alive. You know, Baltimore, Ferguson, Chicago, Detroit, where, you know, where African Americans is sort of kept in, like you said, they're like pressed down in a certain place, and cops get away with, you know, they get away with things they shouldn't get away with, and then they don't answer to anyone as to what really happened. I think it causes a lot of people to be scared, you know, like if you're a black parent and you have a young kid going to school, you know, you sort of think, you know, like how do I teach, you know, like how do I teach a child to be safe in the country, you know, where these things are sort of happening. We saw it with Rodney King, and like I feel like we're going to see it in the future until someone or something does something about these cities where institutionalized racism is still like alive and dwelling.
Yeah. Tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Margot.
Margot, okay. Now, I do have some stuff that I'm going to share, but I'm going to save it a little bit till the end so I can continue to get your thoughts on it.
I think another amazing thing that's happening is that gang members are starting to unite, and that's one of the things that the media wants to, the mainstream media, wants to label as another act of violence. Now gangs are going to start stepping in and killing cops. What do you call this? And I mean, I think that's an amazing thing. It's another thing that happened with gangs in Central America is that, and they just saw a documentary on this, is that in turbulent times, the idea of, and I've studied the concept. I mean, I don't agree with the fundamentals of what it really is, but at the foundation of what gangs are, It's about unity, it's about protecting your neighborhood and protecting yourself, only simply because the system that we have in place builds for that. Just like I said, we can't live in peace, so we're gonna have to live a violent lifestyle, and we're gonna have to join, and we're gonna have to teach our young men and women how to live this kind of lifestyle, because what's out there is not for us, it's for the few, for this, for that, and the other. And it's an amazing thing to see that it's a common thing now to see gangs are starting to break rivalries. They're starting to come together for the cause of of kind of unifying and kind of dissolving away all that. Probably not the lifestyle, but at the very least the segregation within their own communities.
Yeah.
And to come together for the community, and that's where it's going to start.
Yeah. I think, I don't know who touched on this, I'm not sure if it was you or you, but I personally believe the actual segregation is actually coming between cops and society. Like, I even had a conversation with a cop the other day. It was just a regular, hey, how are you doing? And he was just unable to talk to me. And it was more of like, I got the impression that he seemed like, I'm a cop, this is my job, you're a citizen, and there's have to be a barrier between us. And I honestly feel like that's really where the problem is. Like that, it's not, I don't want to say superiority, but the idea of that, you know, there's a lot of gun violence, and there's a lot of you can see on the thing that the cops took it upon themselves to beat this man to death. You know, I've seen other videos of cops shooting. I'm not blaming it just on the cops. I know it's the same way. There's violence everywhere, but I just think it's. Oh, I'm not an expert. I don't know any of this.
The only way that's going to change is those who are tired of, being suppressed or being harassed by them. Not to say that I want to do that job, but somebody else needs to, get in and go take that position. That's the thing. Nobody wants to go be a cop as often as it used to, especially after all this. So those who are actually taking those positions are the same people.
But thank you so much for this.
Family has been doing it for so long, and that's just the way the system is set. If your dad was a cop and if he was a racist cop, that's what your son would be a racist cop. And hopefully the world changes around all that. But until then, it'll be the same. It'll be the same thing over and over, generation after generation.
The way I think we're going to break the pattern is to start training the new police enforcement, and the overall idea that police enforcement, along with firefighters, along with ambulance, they're a service-based job. It's a job that's based on service. It's service to the community. I just saw right now, and I started in my car applauding. It was raining. If not, I would have been honking and hollering. But I saw two cops helping someone push their car out of the street, and so many times. And it's one picture I saw. I didn't get to ever post. One of those things you want to post on there really good. I saw a picture, and it was I think Dave Chappelle, but he said something like, "Don't you always notice how when there's something going on, violence or whatever the case is, cops are right there, but if you have if you have a flat tire or something, nothing happens. Everyone passes by you, all the cops pass by you, everything." And honestly, that's not the point. Cops should pull up to you and ask you if everything's okay before you even pass you by.
You have the state troopers do that.
Yeah, there are some
They
cops
got a policy on that.
Yeah, there are cops who do that. And in fact, there are certain places, I haven't seen it so much in Florida, but in Texas, for instance, there are signs that if you break down on a highway, that you should call the police, and that they will come and assist you. But when we talk about a reduction in the number of people going into law enforcement, that's partly because, of course, law enforcement is also suffering budget cuts. The same way that anything that has to do, and this is going to sound very judgmental on my part, anything that has to do with the public good is on the chopping block whenever budgets shrink. Anything that's for, as you mentioned, the small good, the elite, corporations, et cetera. I mean, I don't know if y'all paid attention to the debate that we hosted last year, but that's all the candidates kept talking about. We need to attract new businesses, and we need to make subsidies for corporations. Subsidies for corporations, that's code for give rich people money, so that they will feel comfortable locating in our state and giving jobs to our people. Now, on one hand, that sounds really politically good. However, The reality of the situation is your life is not going to be improved by a job. Your life is going to be improved by a career that brings you purpose, that brings you a sense of fulfillment, and also pays your bills. You can have a job working in a bowling alley, but that job might not pay you enough. You can have a job working in a gas station, but that job might not pay you enough. So the question is, it's not just about jobs, it's about careers, it's about trajectories for your life that you can strategize and build so that after working for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, you are in a much better position than when you started and you have something to leave for your kids. That's not just about jobs, because you can bring in 10,000 horrible jobs and it doesn't improve the situation. But this is the language that our politicians use. Other? Yeah.
Personally, I think the reason all these riots are happening is because as a crowd, when something drastic happens, people as a crowd, they act drastically towards the drastic situation. When there's a fire in a building and there's people in it, they're not organized. They'll panic and they'll act irrationally unless they're organized. I'm not condoning the violence, but I'm saying it's the reality. That's what happens.
You're doing like a sociological analysis. Yeah. This is how humans behave when there's a particular type of stimuli. I get that. But what we're looking at is, well, how do we now respond?
Peacefully.
Meaning that we as leadership in society should reduce the amount of threatening stimuli. You got me? A little bit? I'm using yeah, well, but that's what the policymakers are there for, you see? That's what the lawmakers are there for. I know, but they don't. What happens is that they don't yet recognize that poverty and despair is a threatening stimuli. Yeah. And so just because you have areas where people are poor and are not doing well, you should not be comfortable with that as policymakers. You should be seeking to change that actively on a daily basis. But particularly in the state of Florida, that's not so much on the agenda. The agenda is this focus on corporations and on businesses, not on directly, deliberately, hands in the dirt, addressing the issues of poverty in these neighborhoods. Likewise in Baltimore, I'm telling you literally 50 miles away from the seat of the most powerful country in the world, there are people living in abject poverty, and that is really the catalyst. Yes, Freddie Gray was the straw that broke the camel's back, but the ongoing socioeconomics in that area is really what led to this. Grab something to eat. Why you don't like dinner? Have something to eat. This one is tuna. So, I'd like. Do any of you have anything that you feel comfortable? Do any of you feel comfortable sharing any experiences that you have had, or someone close to you that you know who have experienced unfair treatment by the police? I mean, I'll confess to you. I mean, I'm a professor. I have a PhD. I have too many expensive pieces of paper. But when all this stuff is going on, every single time I see a cop in my rearview mirror, I'm just like, okay, what direction is he going? Is he paying attention to me? So if where I am in my life, I still feel vulnerable, I can only imagine where young people feel, you know?
I just think that people are in protocol. Your name is job. You know, there's a boss. If you feel a certain way when somebody's pulling you over, he has a boss. Call 911 on him. I know that don't sound, that might not sound normal to a lot of people. If you feel threatened by a cop and he's acting, to say that, for lack of a better word, he's acting like a donkey, you pick up your phone and you call. You call 911 and you ask for a non-emergency. You know, you call in and you say, call in for a non-emergency, and I would like to talk to a captain. And automatically, one, you have, you know, dispatches separate from the police station, so legally you have something with substance that can protect you, because you called in and defeat. So then, with that being said, you know, his boss will actually have to reach out and get him on the line. Before you know it, he'll get a call from headquarters, and he'll slow down. You know, unless you fit some form of description, which is a whole different thing. But a lot of times, you know, you're being what does that mean?
Profile.
You're being profiled. So, I just think that a lot of people are not educated on following protocol instead of acting out. And then, these guys have every right to be nervous because they don't know who's in the car.
Right.
They're scared anyway. So you have to think about that situation as a whole. Because when they're coming out, they automatically scared. So you being scared or you being frustrated or whatnot just intensifies the situation. But you can put all that to rest immediately. Like if you know you didn't do anything wrong, well, call on him. Call on him immediately before he even gets out of his car, before he does anything, and then before you know it, he'll come up and be polite about it because he knows you're a concerned citizen and you're not somebody that's actually calling on him. Because obviously, a normal person who's doing something wrong is not going to call the cop.
Well, I mean,
I got senior chief of police and so on and so forth squad.
I think that's.
I'm king of calling cops on cops.
I think that's. You make some valid points there, but it's also. Well, no, but see, that's right there. You got to be careful because when you get pulled over, any sudden movements you make will intensify the cops' feeling of being threatened. So, I think you're right. I think that there are some courses of action that somebody who is being unfairly targeted can take, but it has to all be done in the context of your immediate safety. So if the cop asks you to keep still, if the cop asks you to show your hands, that's not the time to go reaching for your phone. You understand what I'm saying? It's situational. In some instances, you might not actually be able to take the course of action that our brother right here, you mind me your name? Kenzie, that Kenzie's recommended, you might not actually be able to do that until the stop is over. I'm just saying circumstances.
They're not allowed to tell you to stop.
I know.
It's not like that.
I know, but let me tell you, you've seen how these interactions go.
I've seen it.
Just because you question them, it escalates.
I agree, but as an individual, your job is not. It's the delivery. When you're talking to them, you should be very quiet, very relaxed. It's not like, hey, why you do that? Once you do that, you just change it. Everything's supposed to be at ease, very poised. When you bring it to his attention, it's like they're really pulling me over. If he's once again, if he's being a donkey, like, all right, that's fine. Let him say what he's gonna say. Here's my information, so on and so forth. So then you start walking to his car. Call. Because if he's gonna act like a dick, put paperwork on. Call his boss immediately. If somebody's giving you a problem at school or whatnot, and the teacher's not helping you out, we pay you. This is a service to us, right? No, I got a problem with you. I'm calling his boss. That's just how it goes.
Well,
why should I entertain arguing with him? It doesn't make sense because what? He's not in authority.
Yeah.
So I'm not following protocol. So how to put him to rest? Call somebody over. That's simple.
And I'm hearing you, but there have been instances where the cop actually asks you to hang up the phone.
I know they do because they don't want no tape on it.
Well, there's that, but then there's also in the course of an event. I'll come back to you. As a law-abiding citizen, you are supposed to follow instructions, and if you're not, it's considered resisting. You can get that sorted out in 10 days or 3 weeks or 4 weeks after a review and everything like that. But if you have an opportunity to de-escalate a stop right then at that moment, and then take care of whatever else you want to do to make sure that this person has some paperwork on him, you kind of have to measure it. And you said be poised and be calm. Not everybody knows how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I've been in so many situations where even if my friend's dad is cheap and so on and so forth, and I swear, one day me and my friends will be all bringing out to some home. And this was right here in Hollywood. And it was probably like 10 minutes. We got the limo just so we can go get a couple of minutes. Nobody's driving drunk. We got served.
That's very responsible.
Right. So anyways, something happened at the men's club we were at.
The gentleman's establishment.
Yes.
I'm stopping tape.
In human behavior, in interactions, there is a distribution of what would be the norm.
Right.
Everybody's seen a bell curve somewhere. I hope you've seen a bell curve. Okay. Okay. What you experience would not be in the fat part of the curve.
Right.
You would be, your experience and you as an individual would be an outlier.
Right.
The average person would fall in the fat part of the curve where it would have gone very, very wrong. And so, as valuable as your insights are, I want to caution everyone to understand that Sister Managing Public's friends with a cop, a dispatch on the radio who recognized the threat to you and acted immediately, that is an outlier experience. What is the common experience? Dispatch, sorry, at the very least not contribute to escalation, and just let that stop be over as quickly as possible. I'm sorry for the delay.
Okay.
Introduce yourself. Who are you, fellas?
Giovanni.
Giovanni. Okay.
And going back to what you were saying about the phone call, will cop ever ask any questions? You guys are never required to or obligated to answer his questions. Like they say, you have the right to remain silent. Now, you always have the right. It's 100% legal to film a cop even if you're in your car and he's asking you questions. So if he tries to fight the fact that he's saying, why are you recording me, you still have the right to do it. I myself want to be a police officer, but at the same time, what they're doing is questioning me whether or not I want to be a police officer or not because of what they're doing and the actions they're taking. If they ever ask you, do I have the right to search your car? You could say no. It's not yes because they have a search warrant or anything with them. So you can honestly say that's your Fourth Amendment, right? Yeah.
I think it's also it's not against you to say I can't wait for a search law.
Yeah, and another thing is they don't have the right to search your vehicle. If you're walking and they ask you to stop, honestly tell them you suspect them doing any type of suspicious activity. If they say no, you have the right to walk away free because you're not a threat to them. If they feel threatened, okay, remain calm, please do whatever you gotta do. But it's always 100% legal to record or videotape, whether it's in your car or you're walking. If they say, why do you have your phone out? It's 100% legal. There's nothing against that in the book of law.
All right. Thank you, Giovanni. Now, I'm going to qualify that. Every single thing he said is true. However, you never know the psyche or personality of the individual officer you're dealing with. Okay? I have a sister. I'm just brief story. She's doing her PhD in education right now. She's focused very much on this movement in American education called Black Girls, meaning whereas I'm doing, black and brown males here on campus, she's looking at black girls and how they're treated in education, and particularly the impact of black female educators on their lives. And she says, brother, because she's my brother, whenever I see these things, I always think, what would happen if my brothers were in this situation? My brother Earl, we grew up in the Bronx. Many of you would not assume that I grew up in the Bronx. I probably grew up in the Bronx. And Earl spent more time in the Bronx and is a little bit more, he's more apt to say, why the F you messing with me? Whereas I'm more apt to say, how may I assist you, officer? And so my sister said, well, I know that they might react to Earl this way, but they might even react to Robert that way because they might feel intimidated by him.
Right.
Because he speaks well. Because he comes across as educated, that might intimidate. You never know what's going on in the head of the individual. And so, course of action, you are legally in your right to question the officer. You are legally in the right to refuse to have your vehicle searched. You have the legal right to refuse to have yourself searched. However, if you refuse to have your vehicle searched and the officer is in a mood, then you are going to get arrested and your car is going to get impounded. And that is the difference between a 5-minute stop and a 2-week, 3-week, multiple month situation. If the cop asks you to stop, and you stop just long enough to say, do you suspect me of something? And they say no, and you start to walk away, it's not going to end that way. That's going to be taken as disrespect. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying that's how it's going to be taken. You should not be defensive when you're engaging with authority. You should be cooperative when you're engaging with authority. That has nothing to do with whether or not what they're doing is right or wrong. Because at the end of the day, when it's just you and that cop, that's a matter of life and death. Cooperation is your best likelihood for your safety. You understand what I'm saying? Everybody got me? There is the law, and then there is your safety. Right now, what we are seeing is that the law does not adequately protect everyone's safety. And so therefore, you have to be smart. Don't say, I know the law, this is the law. Yeah, you might have someone who's easily intimidated and they back off, but the majority of them are going to feel that you are challenging them, and they're going to try to assert their authority and their power. Okay? Cooperation, best route. Oh, Lord have mercy.
Now it's going to start.
Oh, no. Come, you mean, put some food in your mouth right now.
Another thing is, tying back to the whole thing, the whole search and pre-recording that, when you also get pulled over, you don't have to roll the window all the way down. You can roll it halfway. That's another
No, I understand, and you're absolutely right. I want everyone to take these as the law, and then how is it going to affect the dynamic of the situation? Okay? No, I'm just saying that's how you need to take this. Because if you roll it down halfway, depending on the cop, they're going to assume you're trying to hide something. Okay? There are legal protections, and there are times when you can invoke them and you're going to be fine. And there are other times where you invoke them and you're going to get harmed. And then after that, there's nothing to do except your parents go and march and protest, and then people in your neighborhood go and march and protest, but you're gone. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is not to invalidate what your friend is saying, but just to say that the current dynamic, the reason why we're having these protests right now is that the law is not working for certain people, certain color, certain economic brackets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you assume that your knowledge of the law is going to protect you from harm, that's not the safest assumption.
Sometimes even when you use it against use their power against their power.
Exactly.
They want to contradict that. They want to work their way around it.
Yeah. In most instances where someone who's being a victim of abuse of authority, police authority, where the compensation comes, it comes way down the road after the person has already been harmed. You understand what I'm saying? The question is that the route you want to go? Or do you just want to get this over with as quickly as possible? That's what your parents want. That's what your mother wants. She doesn't want you in a threatening situation. She wants it done in 5 minutes if possible.
In a sense, it's kind of the same as knowledge and wisdom. Because you can have knowledge but still get in trouble. But if you have wisdom, because wisdom is essentially between the experience and deciding between good or bad choices.
Right.
So as far as knowledge, it's just knowing stuff. Like you said, you may have knowledge, but if you don't have wisdom to discern what to do with it or when to use it, because there are times in certain places when to do things and when not to do things. So getting pulled over by a cop and just flashing your camera around his face, man, just like you said, it's best to just de-escalate it, just cooperate, be like, all right, can I, let me search your car, you know yourself,
well, it is,
you have nothing in your car.
I'm not saying open yourself to being searched. I'm saying that if someone, I'm going to come to you in a moment. If a cop wants to search your car, I would say at that time, I would say, sir, is there a particular reason? Is there tail light out or something else? Is there a specific question that I can answer? Because I don't feel comfortable with you searching my car. At that point, it already starts to get complicated. I've had a car searched once, but I wasn't driving. It was actually a friend's car. I was actually sleeping in the passenger side, and it's a stereotypical situation. Indiana. My friend,
Oh.
yes. My
You
friend.
was sleeping?
I was.
That's what everybody say. Oh, I was asleep.
Well, no. I woke up when we stopped, but my friend was driving his mother's 15-year-old BMW. Okay, but all the cops saw, I'm assuming, was two African American males driving a BMW in Indiana. And I'm from the Caribbean, so I don't deal with this a lot. I don't have to deal with this a lot. I come from black majority societies where, every other cop I'm passing, either knows, is a cousin or, So I just hail them up and we keep going. But so we stopped and one cop's talking to my friend, another cop's talking to me. They're like, "Why are you sleepy?" I'm like, "I just drove from New York, So, but I'm not taking it any. Oh, conversation, how interesting, And then the other cop actually does search the vehicle. They find nothing, and I just like to ask the cop. I'm like, you're not gonna find anything. Don't you guys have a sense of when you're dealing with someone who's actually done something wrong and who hasn't? And then he's like, well, we never can be sure, and so that's why we have to follow procedure. But this was my conversation with the cop. Meaning, the average person would not be able to have a conversation with the cop. Do you understand what I'm saying? They would be so upset, feeling so threatened, feeling so offended by being stopped, assuming just because it was there, because of a black order. I got back into the car with my friend who grew up in Indiana, and he was so upset, crying. He's like, "This is not the first time. It happened to my brother. Everybody knows that my father is the obstetrician. Everybody goes to him, but they still stop us, blah, blah, blah." But because that hadn't been my experience, when I engaged with the cop, I was like having a conversation, And so how much baggage you bring to that engagement is going to impact how it goes as well. Lamar?
Okay, so what you were saying, with the whole stopping, I believe it's justified if you know your rights and to know what is required of you to follow the laws. Like if a cop isn't following the law, then I don't believe there's no who should, just butt in or just give them what they want. I feel as though if you know the law, if he's giving you a hard time, go up the process, call your superintendent. With that whole situation, with getting stopped and it's consistently happening, it's gonna come to a point where just go ahead and call your superintendent unless you have a just reason to pull over and stop. Like a lot of people today don't know the laws, and what's happening is cops are taking advantage of that, and they're finding people, they're looking for. They're looking for the trouble they're looking for, and that's a lot of the problems going on in society today. So I feel as though, knowledge, wisdom, that's all nice, but also, making sure the person who you're speaking with has the knowledge and wisdom as well. Because I can sit here and talk, knowledge and wisdom every day, but if someone off the street, who don't have the same knowledge and the same wisdom, who don't care about it, it's not going to matter. So that's just my opinion.
Jafrani offered some of that. One second.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
But why is it always a responsibility from us to de-escalate the situations when the law enforcement officers are supposed to be the trained ones and are supposed to come in, with the mindset of, hey, we're going to get this over with as quickly as possible?
I'm going to come to you, B, but I want to introduce two concepts for you. One's called reality and one's called normative. Reality is how it is, normative is how it should be. The minute you start talking about should, you're in normative world. You're in the world of wishing and talking about this shouldn't happen, that shouldn't happen, this should be the case. And if you live there, you're going to find yourself in problems when you get face to face with reality. So that's one. That being said, how many times outside of the context of a police engagement have you found yourself having to be the bigger person to avoid a larger issue? With your brothers and your sisters, with your parents, anybody who feels that they have some authority over you, you at some point have to choose to be the bigger person. Not UB, because, UB is a special, entity altogether. Not even sure if he's of this earth, but that's okay because I still love him, okay? But just understand that when you're dealing with shoulds, you cannot ignore reality. And this is not just pointed at you, Fabian. The reality is that life is unfair, and when people have authority over you, they will push to the degree that they're going to be able to get away with it. And you have varying degrees of being able to resist that. But if you overestimate your ability to resist that, you could end up dead. That's an extreme. Or you could end up fired. That's in your job situation. You could end up failing a class. Some of you get into conflict with your professors and you think, well, this professor's out of place and they're doing this and they're doing that and they're not being fair to me. And you want to make a whole big protest and campaign about it. Semester's over, you failed, and then what?
That's right.
In every single, and there are these discussions that households, as a childhood, you were raised to recognize when it's appropriate to challenge authority and when it's not. And what happens is that so many households now, it's kind of like a free-for-all where you can question mommy, you can question daddy, you can hit mommy, you can hit daddy, so that when you get onto the broader society, you think that same rules apply. That's not reality. One day you're going to come up against somebody who has a bit more power than you, and they might use it to end you. You mean?
Part of what you were speaking about normative and what actually happened, I'm bringing it up because one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that it's not even common practice, the actual training regimens that police go through in multiple states are to vilify black people, are to automatically go towards them, are that have been like, ignore white people in certain areas or even during certain crimes, and go after black and Hispanic people. That's not even a conspiracy. That is actual doctrine that goes by on many, not just state police, but federal level. You see these different DEA agents coming out with books about what they were trained. You have unclassified documents that are out there that people that don't know how to access, which show that during what situations who are targeted and who are gone after. So when we talk about the normative, what should be is what they want you to think and what you think that the system is there to protect you. The system is not there to protect us. When it comes to blacks, when it comes to Hispanics, when it comes to any minorities, even women, our society is not meant for us. Our society and systemic guardians of the society is meant for the people who make money in society. We are almost expendable in some shape or another. That's how we are seen. So when people say, how society should be, or how the police should be, or how the judges should be, that's just what they want you to believe. What it actually is a system set up for a certain minority to keep making money, and for the rest of us basically to make them money, and for us to be subjugated to whatever. If you look at any throughout history, even without capitalism, somebody always has to be at the bottom. Somebody always has to be used, abused, and taken advantage of. And because of that, you have it to where America now, it's just more effective of who is to be the ones to be used and abused like that. And sadly enough, it falls down to us. Okay. So this whole idea that what everything should be, get that out of your mind, because that's not what it is.
And so, long distance high five. Okay. The other thing to be aware of is that in these types of societies, the who should be, many of us think, it's only black people. Sometimes Latino people think, it's only Latino people. In societies like this one, and most, the people at the bottom is very, very broad because it needs to be broad to support that little point at the top, okay? So that when you think that it's only you because of the color of your skin, or you because you're a woman, or you because this, no. There's a whole wide variety of people who are being pressed down to support that point at the top of the pyramid. And the way they continue to be successful is because they play us off against each other. Women against men, African American against Hispanic, Chinese against non-Chinese, or Asians against non-Asians. The minute we are able to cooperate with each other, the paradigm is going to shift. But that's very hard. And they know that, and they exploit that. And when I say they, it's not to say that it's only white people at the top. The reality of the situation is that this paradigm exists in every single societal structure, regardless of race. You go to an all-black society, you've got really, really rich black people up at the top, keeping a whole bunch of poor people, predominantly black, down at the bottom. It's at this point in our history as human beings, it's not so much about race anymore as much as it's about economics. The rich people in any cultural context are in it for themselves. and you need to have that broad base to keep you in power. So don't think that this is just a global race thing. This is a global rich versus non-rich thing. Okay?
I actually want to say that that's not a new thing. The idea that that how economics play a structure and everything has been a very dated concept. And the thing is, you have certain things that come out of that, and which people use to justify it. Like racism came out of the economic struggle of keeping certain people down and everything. Because there's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but they're like, when you can convince the worst white man that he is better and more powerful than the most educated and powerful black man, it is easy to steal from everyone's pockets. And you have it to where, like, what came out of slavery, what came out of colonization, neo-colonization, all of it was driven by money. But how do you have people co-sign to that? You're like, how do you control people's minds and allow them to subjugate themselves? Is you have to put certain systems in place to where they believe that somehow they're better or someone's less human, and that's what race. The idea of race was originally created to separate people, to keep them weak. To say that economics is the only issue is semi-true. It's the main issue. All the other issues are not distractions, but they come because of it. They're they're symptoms. They're symptoms of the greater problem. And sometimes, and just for when you get sick, if you start attacking the certain symptoms and figuring out what it is, then you're able to find out what the cause of the disease is. You go by the system, and you go by the symptoms, and you get rid of them. So if we were to come together and start going against what each our symptoms are, why is there racism? Why is there this? Why is there that? We'll start to notice that it all comes back from one larger issue, because a lot of times people want to bite at certain issues and never realize how they're all interconnected.
That's the reason why the Jim Crow has been so effective throughout the whole entire history.
Because Jim Crow is an adaptation of actual different laws and practices that happen all over Europe, especially during the what people know now is Germany. It used to be called Germany, and Germany used to be a lot bigger. So if you look at the entire history of Europe, is savage beyond comparison to any other place in the world. The longest history of savagery, of brutality, of war, of slavery, of anything else has all stemmed from Europe. And the different practices that come out of Europe has been changed. Like what we know of Jim Crow now was how they used to define Slavics and non-Slavics back when Germania was taking over. What we think is something new to us is it's been going on for a very long time. And because we only look at what's happening now and not how things are connected, we are constantly distanced from realizing that we together are humans, and that we should stop this paradigm of having this minority ruling us. We are only attacking symptoms separately, but when we realize all the symptoms come together are a telltale sign of what the entire infection is, maybe we can do something about it, but we're not doing that.
Absolutely. Fabian, you had something?
Oh, let me see if I can remember. Let's say right now, right? Say it again? Let's say UB, for instance. People like you and I, we are aware, and probably this gentleman here, because I saw him before, we are aware that the system is corrupt and not in our favor. So what are we going to do to change that? That's the question. If you think back to when America was founded, technically people like George Washington, they were terrorists to the British. So when you come down to it, it takes those kind of protests in order to get what you want for people to know. Well, technically, we're still owned by England, right?
No.
I believe so.
No.
Conspiracy-wise, we are.
We'll chat about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Yes. But, sometimes it takes for those extreme measures for you to have to kill someone in order for you to get what you want.
Okay.
And it's not always what one would want to do, but sometimes it's necessary.
Okay, so I will go back to what I said at the beginning in not advocating violence. However, what I want to clarify UB a little bit, clarify Fabian a little bit. The economic system that existed in Europe that led to the enslavement of Africans was to replace the enslavement of Europeans. Okay, everybody got that? Yes. They didn't call it slavery, they call it serfdom. You were a serf, and you were just as white as the people who were over you. Okay? This had been practiced in Europe for thousands upon thousands of years, and other parts of the world as well. It was practiced in Asia as well. It was called serfdom. It wasn't called slavery. But essentially it meant that you got to live on somebody else's land as long as you paid rent. The rent could be in money if you had it, but you likely didn't. So it meant the rent came in the crops that you grow, if you sewed clothes for the main house, if you cleaned for the main house or whatever, or if you had a pretty daughter or son who would get visits from the master of the house, the landlord, every once in a while, okay? So that this whole concept of subjugation it's not actually predicated on race. It transitioned to race as Europe sought to lift itself into a new economic state of being. And in so doing, it subjugated pretty much all non-white people. But in the Western world, significantly, it was subjugation of people of African descent. It affected the Indians of the Caribbean, Central and South America, and North America, but it also, in fact, impacted India and Asia as well. Similar types of subjugation happened in India, for instance. The reason why it was a bit different in India is because India way outnumbered the Europeans by millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people. But still, Britain, France, Portugal, and Denmark were able to carve up India for 400 years. The only difference is that the majority of the Indians were still able to participate in some of the governance structures, which meant that Indians were helping the Europeans to keep control of the rest of the Indians. Okay? Now, the transition now, and this is why I really think it's important for us to recognize this as in 2015 a significant economic issue, is that as much as Oprah might complain about some mistreatment she got in a store in Europe a couple of years ago because they didn't know who she was, at the end of the day, Oprah could still go back and buy that store and fire those people and say, ha. Okay? The average African American in our country do not have that type of power. And that power comes through, well, to a certain degree, self-empowerment, education, pursuing career, gainful employment, and so on and so forth. And through that empowerment, being able to demand from society, being able to demand from the lawmakers, demand from the policymakers, more equitable distribution of what are called public goods. In some cases, it's public safety. In some cases, it's justice. In some cases, it's access to credit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I need you to understand that it's never going to come out of the kindness of their hearts. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can have really, really nice people who want to do nice things and care for people who are needy and so on and so forth, but the greatest gains in justice come from empowered people who can demand from society what they deserve. That empowerment comes from individual development, meaning why you're here, your education, learning about career opportunities, pursuing those career opportunities, learning about the importance of saving. Meaning you think, well, I'm empowered now, I can get the new iPhone whenever I want to, and then you're paying 3 times the amount because you got it on credit, and you pay the minimum each month. I'm not talking about anybody, I'm not trying to call anybody out, I'm just trying to let you know, that is not empowerment. That is disempowerment, because you end up paying more for that thing that you're going to get rid of a year from now than if you save that money and use that money for an investment in a house, an investment in something that actually grows wealth for you, that you can then transfer into political power. Wealth translates into political power. Things do not translate into political power. Okay? So that's my sermon for today. I'm going to come down off my platform. But we're going to chat for another 5 minutes or so. Let you guys wrap up any thoughts that you might have about the circumstance. I know we kind of ventured away from Baltimore, but this is still really about Baltimore. What is going on in Baltimore is disenfranchised, disempowered communities reacting to the perpetuations, the persistence of that disempowerment. And we can talk about how wrong what has happened to them and what is happening to them is. We can talk about that for years. But I need us to talk about what each of us individually can do to empower ourselves to be a part of the change. And you are already doing it. You just need to know that you're doing it, do it more, and then apply it when you have the opportunities. I saw a hand.
Yeah, about what you said earlier about the media sort of demonizing people in Baltimore, and I don't think any of us condone what they're doing there, the destruction and all that. But at the same time, like, I go on my Facebook feed and I see some people like sort of buying into it, and I don't know if it's because I'm more sympathetic than most people, but like, while I don't agree with what they're doing, I feel for them, like, they want answers, they want justice, they want to feel safe in this country. And I think another part of the problem, not just the law enforcement and the authority of us and all that, is just some regular people like us might not necessarily see it the same way and look at them as animals and, they say things like, this isn't the foundation that this country was built on. And I'm like, this country was built on the back of slaves, It's like, I feel like when they say stuff like that, they don't go back far enough and do their research. But I think I guess it's up to us in a way to sort of like not spread a message or anything or just argue with them, but just sort of help them open their eyes in any way you can. Because the people in Baltimore, regardless of what they're doing, they're not animals. They're people like us, and they're just trying to fight for something they believe in.
Exactly. I'm going to go to UB, but I want to just quickly address. I was once in a class where I was in Texas. I did my PhD in Texas, so you can just acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Similar to the incident in Indiana. We're talking about places where you expect there to be racism. Okay? And one of my classmates, God love her, she said, a white young lady said, I think that people in America just really trust their government more than people elsewhere because, we're just usually so calm and I think America just does a really better job than some of these younger countries. And so I sat there. I said a silent prayer. Because you need to find the right words to respond to that kind of stuff. Okay, America is at this point in history barely 300 years old, meaning as it is. I mean, yes, it existed as a colony of Britain, but you can't talk about America until independence. That's one. She was talking about some riots that were happening in Eastern Europe, and many of y'all don't know this, but there were riots in the UK just this past weekend. Okay? And it was for similar reasons. It wasn't about a death, but it was about the fact that people just can't afford to live in the neighborhoods that their parents and their grandparents once owned property in. And this all goes back to how wealth is just edging upwards in the hands of this few. Okay? And so when we talk about rioting happens, violent demonstration happens when people feel powerless. When they cannot go to an officer and say, "Officer, I am being harmed, assist me." Or an officer of the court, lawyer, judge, or their politicians, elected official, "Help me, I am being harmed." When you don't feel that access, you feel powerless. And what happens when you feel powerless? You lash out. And this has been happening all throughout human history. It is not something that's relegated only to Black or Latino or populations. It happens wherever groups of people feel disenfranchised, disempowered, and they feel oppressed. And so no, they're not animals. In fact, they're responding exactly how we would theoretically and historically expect them to respond. The question is, how will the politicians and policymakers respond? If they follow the normal modus operandi, they're going to put a Band-Aid on it, quiet things down for a little while, and wait until the next flare-up. UB?
Alright, well, there are a lot of things I want to reply to, but since you said we were already out of time, let me just say this. It's something that I learned over last weekend when I was at the Florida African American Student Association 40th convention. And one of the things that one of these doctors there, he came and spoke to us, said that the powerful will never educate the powerless to take the power away from the powerless. So everything that you learn in college, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with college, but everything you learn in college is not enough. Everything that you do here is a good step, but it's not enough. The idea that just being here is enough and then you're going to do more and like you're conscious now, like no, there's so much more you need to venture out and do for your own. Not just join groups, but create something. Because you can't rise to the power of change on someone else's coattails. Because eventually they're going to change something, you're just going to be there along for the ride, and you can't do as much. And a lot of what needs to be done is we need to start creating our own spaces and realizing what they are supposed to be. Because the education that we get here is good, but it's not enough. Nothing that you ever, that someone, even if you pay for it, will never be enough. The most that you can get out of life is something that you create. So if you're not creating it, then always remember it's not enough.
All right.
And I just want to say why I'm okay with Baltimore, with the violence more. Because no one like if you look into the history of what Baltimore is, or has become, and how bad economically, medically, and everything else that city is, the city is sick and dying. And it's compared to a third world country. There's actually third world countries that are doing better than Baltimore. And but here to say, oh, when violence is wrong. No, violence brings attention, and it brings the attention that people, you can no longer ignore what Baltimore is. You can no longer get away from all the things that's happening in Baltimore. There's no more way of letting a third world country, basically a third world country, be inside of a first world. There is no more of that because the violence has brought the attention and the necessary action that will continue to happen in Baltimore. So everybody says the violence is not necessary. Everything peaceful that's been happening, there's been no media coverage, there's no politicians going there. The violence is what is bringing attention and what is bringing change. Granted, it may not be the only thing that's necessary, but it is necessary. To say violence is never necessary is ignorant to that the world is more complex. Nothing is black and white. There is more than just one route to get anywhere.
Absolutely. Mark?
I'm not saying I disagree, but it's a step in the right direction. But let's look at what the media is portraying. The media is not portraying, the different protests and arguments that were being given, or like when they actually sat down and tried to talk, normally to people. Like the media is portraying it and filming it as people who are acting uncivilized and disrespectful. So is it getting attention? Yes. Is it getting the right attention that it needs? I don't think it is. I believe that all we're doing is we're giving them more fuel to justify why what they're doing is right and why things are going to continue. Like we said, they're going to put a Band-Aid on it again because even though the violence gets the attention, no one is taking the steps after that violence to make sure that the attention is given and driven in the right direction.
So I'm gonna go to Fabian, and what I want to do just to help sort of develop that a little bit is that the reason why it's going to be a Band-Aid is because of the issue of representation. Meaning they're going to do stuff, they're going to maybe mobilize X amount of millions of dollars and do repairs and maybe give little grants for the business owners or even some of the residents. That will be the nature of the Band-Aid. But if you look at the Northern Ireland British context, Northern Ireland is a part of Great Britain. But up until the late 80s, there were significant domestic terrorist cells within Northern Ireland that were trying to take out my cousin Queen Elizabeth. All right, y'all don't know about this. I have British ancestry, so like I call her Liz. Right? They had an assassination plan for the Queen of England. They were bombing London. This is Northern Ireland. How it was finally resolved, because the violence was there, and actually much of it was funded by Irish people in America, but that's another story. Exactly. But when they got to the point of peace and reconciliation, it was so that the political arm of the IRA, the political arm known as Sinn Féin, would be included in the government structure. So that this group, which felt disenfranchised and disempowered, was now included into the government structure and each Congress, each session had representation from Sinn Féin. And so therefore, you know that if you have grievances, you know that your representatives are advocating for that, are dealing with that. In Baltimore and in these contexts where race seems to be the issue, is that the leadership doesn't change. There is no inclusion of people from that area who are part of the major decision making in the future. And so that there has been no true peace and reconciliation component to dealing with the race issue in America. And that's why everything they do ends up being band-aids. If it works for dealing with activities, disruptive activities in other national contexts, if it worked in South Africa to a certain degree, because it's really not, if it worked in Britain with the IRA in Northern Ireland, why are we not dealing with this conflict resolution paradigms that exist and that we employ throughout the world right here in the domestic context? Okay? Fabian?
All right, so I know you're saying that now you're an advocate for peaceful protests, right? But everything you've been saying, you have agreed to that, let's say, change is a direct result of violence. For instance, the RA and the terrorists of the late 1700s.
Me specifically, or these
No,
guys?
you.
Okay, I own that. I own that because I personally would never participate in violent protest. I would always be the diplomat. I would be the one seeking to build consensus and seek for people to coalesce around me for the purpose of articulating a clear demand.
Okay.
However, I recognize that historically, much of the attention that you need to express an articulate demand only follows after there's been some violent disruption.
Exactly.
So in other words, there's a necessary need.
Exactly. So
That I personally would not participate.
Well, that was clear.
I got a second part too. You done, bro? Yeah, you done.
No, go ahead.
All right. So the second part is that you're saying that the only way for change is through self-education, empowerment, and
then
education.
and then application.
Exactly. But when you think about it, the system is corrupt. So if we do those things, what they pretty much lead us to do, that will furthermore damage the system or lead the system to, work. So why are we continuing to do what they want us to do?
I'm going to respond to that, and then I'm going to have Alex. What I want us to be aware of.
Do you have to go to school to be educated? Exactly.
No, you don't have to go to school to be educated, but you do have to go to school to be educated in what are the mainstream avenues towards success.
So you can have access.
Okay? You can, outside of school, you get educated. You're educated on how to cross the street, checking both ways. That's an education. You get educated on if you want something from someone, it's best to approach them in a nice way. All of that's education. But if you want to become influential in the power structures as they exist, you need to have a mainstream education. That being said, that the system as it exists is corrupt. I'm not debating that. However, there is not one, and I repeat, not one human system, human organization that exists that is not corrupt.
I can agree with that.
Corruption is inherent to the human condition. And so that as we pursue improvement in a particular corrupt system, please do not fool yourself into believing that you're going to get one that's not corrupt. Okay? It's the pursuit of improvement, not the absence of corruption. The absence of corruption does not exist in our world. Alex.
I think basically the main ingredient is awareness and development. That's mainly the main things. Being educated, more than anything, being wise, aware, and involved. Those are the three main ingredients. It's obviously not black and white. That's why a lot of people get upset with me because they're like, that's so vague. And I'm like, yeah, because you're supposed to interpret it into how you view it, and how you think, and put all that together, and then you will act on it. And it's another thing also, like you said, that you would be more the diplomat. I'm mostly the same way, especially more so with my age. Although it's one thing from America English, she said, it's like, don't get it twisted, this incense and tea will turn into Newports and a the Code 45 real quick. So as much as I'll be right there, I'll sing, I'll march, everything will be peaceful, I'll be right there throwing rocks as well. And that's just me. Everyone has their own position, everyone has their own place. You need to figure out what it is and where it is and manifest it the most you can. But I'm right there in between both. Probably more so with throwing rocks since it's a little more fun.
Funny how that doesn't surprise me. All right. So, Fred, go ahead. No, Fred, go ahead.
No.
Fred, it's okay. I'm closing. You go ahead.
No, I'm
You've
closing
been quiet.
too. I was closing with you.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
You can be my opening closing. Let's go.
Thank you guys for joining us today. That's
all right. You taking off?
Oh yeah, I gotta go finish my
All right,
final.
good luck.
Thank you, appreciate
All right.
it.
I know that this is a brief conversation. I know that we could talk about it for months. Some of you actually are talking about it in Food for Thought and other platforms. But as I saw this going on, I reached out to leadership and I said, we need to either say something or do something. I will let you know there was reluctance to have a statement be put out for a number of different reasons, but they did agree to us hosting this forum, and I appreciate you guys coming out. I appreciate your input. Most importantly, I just want you to know that we do care. We are aware that you are affected by these things, even if it's not happening right here in Florida, to the level that is happening in Baltimore. It is happening, and I just never want you to feel that we're ignorant of the fact that you are thinking about it. It does cause you concern. It does make you scared at times. We want you to succeed here because your success here and your success in your life is what I perceive to be the best vehicle for you to be agents of change. If you remove yourself from the system altogether, you can't affect the system. I'm sorry. Even with these terrorist groups, and some people say they remove themselves, but the fact that they keep re-engaging in these violent ways, it means that they recognize that change needs to happen in the system. They're not doing it in the diplomatic way, but they're still re-engaging. And the goal of lawmakers and the diplomats like me is to now how to build the system even bigger so it accommodates these groups who don't feel that the system represents them. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to move forward.
She do this once a week. Just saying.
We'll work on it.
I hope somebody ain't getting killed once a week.
But let's do it. Somebody else somewhere.
By police brutality, someone dies
We'll
every
work
8
on it
hours.
for the fall.
Now when it comes to black people, it's once every 36 hours.
We'll work on it for the fall. The challenge, however, is that it's about commitment. Because what ends up happening is people's lives get busy, and then one week you have 2 people, the next week you have 10 people. You know, there needs to be a commitment, and I think the commitment is going to come from a sense of purpose. So, you know, maybe we'll get together as a small group and figure out what that sense of purpose would be that would facilitate people being willing to commit to a regular meeting. Okay? Thank you very much.